Hey, we are moving into our last module where we are going to be writing an argument essay. And the materials have been posted to the Module 4 folder. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the essay itself so that we can do the blog for this week. Blog 10 is asking what you want to write about. So we voted on the rights of the incarcerated for this essay, which is, like all of our topics have been, an enormous topic. So we have to find something that's manageable to do in the scope of this essay. So first of all, thinking about the topic itself, if you pull up the argument assignment sheet, there will be some potential ways that you can find what you want to research and write about. So this essay can look at topics specific to a group of people. So if we look at issues specific to incarcerated children, well, we don't often think about incarcerated children, but we incarcerate children. We have juvenile detention facilities. So think about things that, if a child is incarcerated, they still are a child. They still need their education. How do we rehabilitate a child that has committed crimes and has been incarcerated? If somebody's 16 and a half or 17, should we send them to a juvenile detention facility? Should we send them to an adult facility? What are the appropriate types of punishments and restrictions for these children? You can consider what happens after they're released. You can look at issues specific to incarcerated parents. So if we want to consider visitation rights, should they be granted? Under what conditions should they be revoked? What about women who are pregnant or going to give birth while they are incarcerated? There's a lot of debatable issues about that, like women being shackled while they're in the hospital giving birth, or how long should they be able to keep the infant with them? Do they get visitation rights, etc.? We can also look at other demographics. So what do we do for our Jewish population, right? We're depending upon the prison system for our religious freedom. So if you're Jewish, are they serving your kosher meals? If you're Muslim, are they providing you halal meals or, prayer times? How do they protect Christians' rights in there? We can also look at people who are married. What are the concerns for married people when one person is incarcerated? Transgender convicts. So which prison do we send them to? How do we protect them from transphobic violence or sexual violence? What about our disabled population? People who are drug addicted, things like that. You can look at voting rights. That's a big issue. In some states, you can vote while incarcerated. Other ones you can't. Sometimes if you're a felon, the state will revoke your rights. You can never vote again. Sometimes voting rights are restored when you're done with your sentence. Sometimes you have to go through an appeal process. So you can look at these voting and issues. Education or job training. Do these institutions have a moral obligation or civic obligation to provide education, provide job training, things like that? Drug abuse and mental health counseling, and also health care. You're depending on this institution to provide you your health care. So do they provide mental health services? What about drug counseling? Most of our states criminalize drugs so that instead of going to a rehab facility, if you have a drug problem, you go to prison. So what are the issues along with that? Also, all the way down to something like menstrual care products. You can see things where prisoners aren't provided enough material or products to get through their menstrual cycle, and you're depending on this institution to provide these things for you. Being protected from violence, violence from inmates inmates, but also violence from corrections officers. And this is, when we look at issues of sexual violence, this is a huge concern in our prisons. Also, if we look at the current COVID pandemic. So what are the issues that our inmates are facing? We can also look at, like voting rights, what happens once they are released, once they're no longer incarcerated. So having to fill out a job questionnaire and saying, have you ever been convicted of a crime, and these types of impacts that it can have on our convicts' lives once they are released and back to being full citizens. So there are a zillion topics to look at under this huge umbrella. So if you don't have anything that's currently, you're like, oh, I really want to write about this, do some preliminary research. See what people argue about and debate. Because this essay is not just informative. You're not just saying, this is the situation in Oregon. You're going to make a debatable argument. You're going to take a debatable stance. So you're not just teaching us in this like you did in some of our previous essays, like the causal analysis. You were just teaching us. This one, you're going to take that stance. So your format can be taking a position to say, this is right, this is wrong, we shouldn't do this. Every place should be like what they're doing in New York City, whatever. You're going to take a debatable stance. You can do a compare and contrast. We did one of those essays previously. If you like that, you can compare what's the effect of, this versus this, and argue that one is better than the other. You can also do a searching for causes. So what is the reason that this trend is happening? And you can take a debatable stance to say this is why this is happening. You can propose solutions. So if we're having this problem, how do we go about solving it? Offer some solutions. So the main thing is that we have to make sure that it's debatable. So try putting in those should statements to say this should be like this, or this shouldn't be like that, or we should do it this way, or those judgment statements to say this is wrong, or this is cruel and unusual punishment, or it's our moral responsibility to provide this for children who are incarcerated, or whatever it is. So we're going to be looking for 3 to 5 sources. And by now we've talked about, how is a credible source? These can be from online, our library databases. These can be, if you know anybody that you would like to interview. You cannot, there's a lot of restrictions on interviewing people who are currently incarcerated. So if that's something that you're interested in, like your cousin's in jail and you want to interview him, we have to be very careful about doing research on targeted populations like the incarcerated. So talk to me about that, and we can discuss that as a potential option. But at least one of your sources should be found using a library database. So when you log into your MyPath and you click on libraries, find one of your articles there, because our library provides those databases and those very credible, wonderful materials right there for you. So in this, you need to make sure that your thesis is debatable and that the scope of this is manageable. We also need to have a balance of logos, ethos, and pathos and how we appeal to our audience. The only people that we ever try to persuade are people who disagree with us, right? So if you already are a UK fan, I don't have to convince you that UK is a great team, right? The only people I have to convince to become UK fans are people who aren't fans. They disagree. So when we look at this debate, we have to consider the people that we are writing to. They disagree with us. So if I'm arguing that solitary confinement is cruel and unusual punishment and that solitary confinement should be abolished, I'm writing this paper to people who support solitary confinement. So I have to figure out how to appeal to this particular audience. What is their worldview? What are their values? What do they not know? What are they misunderstanding? So that I can try to, target them where they are and bring them over to my side of the fence. And when we do that, we need to make sure that our logic is sound and that our evidence is credible. So we're going to look at all those kinds of things. So blog 10 is asking you what specifically is your debatable thesis. So you need to come up with what you want to argue. Remember, your thesis is not a question. Your thesis cannot be, should women be shackled while giving birth? You need to answer that and say, yes, they should, or no, they shouldn't, or only these types of women should be. Your thesis should not just be informative. Shackling pregnant women during birth is very controversial. Okay, that's just informative. That's not telling me what you think about it. You have to take that debatable stance and make it clear where you're standing on that. So that's your blog 10. And then we have an extra credit blog this week asking you to look for 3 of your sources for your argument essay. You don't want to wait till the middle of next week because next week is Thanksgiving. So I'm trying to push you to get some or all of your research done this week because I know some of you will be busy next week with holiday things. Next week we will be looking at, there isn't a blog because we're going to be on holiday, and also we'll be writing this essay, hopefully. Blog 11 will be asking what your counter argument is. That's where we really consider what that audience who disagrees with us, what they have to say. So if I propose solutions, well, even the best solution has a weakness, has a flaw, has a risk, it costs money, it's not going to solve everything. So we have to acknowledge some kind of counter argument in this essay to acknowledge what the people who disagree with us are thinking and saying. So the argument essay will be due the last week of classes, so December 6th. We have a lot we need to do in this one because, this is kind of like our final exam. So this is where you prove that you can do the skills that English 101 is trying to teach you. So finding sources, incorporating them, citing them, grammar, organization, structure, logic, all those kinds of things. So there's a lot to do. So don't wait until the last minute to do this. Make sure to ask me any questions you have, and have a good day.